Let's get covered, NYC. Health insurance plans are now more for.
Go ahead, Vicki.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming this evening. My name is Vicki Miller, and I am the founder and group leader of Indivisible Philadelphia. I'm also a member of the Indivisible Pennsylvania Steering Committee, which is the group putting on this event tonight. Indivisible is a grassroots-led organization that supports equity, inclusion, compassion, and justice. With groups all across the counties across the Commonwealth, from Allegheny to Bucks to Clarion to Dauphin, and all the rest of our Pennsylvania alphabet, our local organizations stand with our allies to defend our nation's democracy. Further, we could not begin without recognizing that sundown tonight marks the start of Yom HaShoah, the Day of Holocaust Remembrance. I hope that you all can find some space across the next day to remember all those who lost their lives to a vicious authoritarian regime, and to find a way to help make the cries of never again a reality in our time. Okay, I want to thank the hundreds of you again for coming out this evening to hear from our Democratic senatorial candidates, John Fetterman, Malcolm Kenyatta, and Connor Lamb. We've worked with group members to come up with a set of questions that for the most part have not been asked at many of the forums and debates that have occurred so far this primary season. We also will be asking questions about issues where the candidates hold differing positions. So if you're not hearing about issues of particular concern to indivisibles, like voting rights or the filibuster, that's because these three candidates are in much the same place on those issues. We will be hearing from each candidate individually and in alphabetical order. So let me give you a couple of technical pieces of information about the meeting. Of course, this is on Zoom and it's in webinar format, so you won't see all of the hundreds of people who are on this meeting. You are all on mute, and that's because we have about 600 people signed up. The chat is disabled, but we will be opening the chat periodically to give you the Indivisible Pennsylvania website, because it includes a lot of useful links to the candidates' bios, their social media handles, and links to previous Senate forums. So Becca's going to do that now. We also have closed captioning in use, and that can be found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It's titled Live Transcript. The event is being recorded, as you heard, and it's also being live streamed on our Pennsylvania Indivisible Facebook page. All right, and now I have the great honor of introducing tonight's moderator, Khadijah Kenner. Khadijah is the founding executive director of the New Pennsylvania Project, a voting rights organization modeled after the very successful New Georgia Project, founded by Stacey Abrams in 2014. The New Pennsylvania Project's primary focus is to civically engage, register, mobilize, and empower often ignored constituents, especially the youth and communities of color in rural, urban, and suburban Pennsylvania, to transform and expand the electorate in our Commonwealth. In addition to working on voting rights, Khadijah also serves as co-chair of Why Courts Matter Pennsylvania, an advocacy campaign seeking to protect the independence of our state and federal courts and to educate the electorate about their importance. And so without further ado, I give you Khadijah.
Thank you very much, Vicki. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Indivisible. Good evening, everyone. So grateful to be with you this evening. We are in for quite an evening. We're going to have the three top candidates for Pennsylvania's Senate seat in the United States Senate, and I couldn't be more proud to be your moderator for tonight. And so without further ado, we're going to get right into this. I want to mention that tonight's format is more of a forum. It's not a debate, right? So this is going to be a forum. It's an opportunity for the candidates to answer 7 questions. Each of them will get to answer 7 questions from us this evening. And why this is important for all of you, I mean, obviously, as Vicki mentioned, we're not going to be asking the questions that have been asked multiple times of folks, unless there's a different way in which we're going about asking the question to see if we can get a different type of response. But what you should know is that our first candidate of the evening is Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. He could not be with us this evening, but he's going to tell us why, and we're going to show his video of the 7 questions that we asked Mr. Fetterman just late last week. So Becca's going to play the video for you to start this off. Good afternoon, Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman is with us today. Good to see you, Lieutenant Governor. I'm really happy that you're joining us today to talk about these important issues and joining the forum. And so I want to just open it up to you right immediately and give you a couple minutes here just to talk about yourself and why it is that you're running for this office. And yeah, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I want to thank Indivisible for allowing me to participate. I also want to thank you for allowing me the option of recording this in advance. I am unable to attend live because as chair of the Pennsylvania Board of Pardons, I'm right now, I will be interviewing lifers that are seeking commutations during the time when this event was otherwise scheduled that I absolutely have to be a part of and attend as board chair. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to participate, but I'm also incredibly proud of the work that I do as chair of the Board of Pardons, conferring second chances here in Pennsylvania and having that become a critical piece of the criminal justice process, here in our Commonwealth. So thank you on both counts for allowing me to do this. Our campaign is going incredibly well. Our campaign is all based on this idea that, we believe Democrats need to come together and vote like Democrats in this cycle. And I'm running to be that 51st senator that is going to always lean in to be that 51st vote if we need to get things done, quite frankly. We were the first campaign to call for the elimination of the filibuster because we realized early on, but before the majority of the party was there, that if we don't do this, we have effectively no chance of enacting some of the transformative legislation that our country needs, whether that's raising the minimum wage, whether that's protecting voting rights, whether that's codifying Roe v. Wade into law, whether that is enacting common sense gun control legislation, healthcare, you name it, things that most Americans want, but we're not able to achieve because of the filibuster. If you don't support the filibuster, you're effectively saying there's going to be 10 or 12 Republicans that are going to join us to help us get this done. And in the process of this campaign, we've built the largest grassroots organization, perhaps of any challenger nationally, Republican or Democrat. We've had about 200,000 grassroots donors, and we're in about 90% of Pennsylvania zip codes. And we have created a new map of what and where Democratic support can fully exist here in Pennsylvania. We believe that's what's important, that to win in a tough cycle, because we believe it's going to be a tough cycle. Our philosophy is that if you trust us with your vote in May, you'll always have our vote in DC. You will never, pick up your phone or the newspaper and see, oh, he's not supporting minimum wage, or oh, he wouldn't support Build Back Better, or any of these other critical issues. And we've run a uniformly positive race, and we believe that winning is what's most important to flip this seat and turn it blue, but not winning at any cost and not winning at the expense of tearing down fellow Democrats. And that's the race that we have committed to and the race that we are going to finish out during this primary. So thank you again for the chance to participate.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. You mentioned a lot of different pieces of legislation, things that we would like to have seen passed here in this past session. So I want to ask this of you. If you are elected into this position and you are part of the next Congress, what is that one piece of legislation that you'd like to see moved in your first 100 days? If you can be impactful, what is that one piece of legislation you want to see moved in that first 100 days?
I'm going to kind of hedge because there's two things that really, mean everything to me. One is our minimum wage of $7.25 is a disgrace, or is a national disgrace. I, for the life of me, can't understand why we as a caucus cannot just come together and realize that $7.25 an hour is unacceptable, and it isn't even close to being acceptable. The other one would be voting right protections and legislations, where the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, whatever this idea, whatever we need to do to pass to protect universal voting access as well too. It is not a secret that the Republicans are going to have taken steps to shave off the margins. They're doing it here in Pennsylvania with the ballot initiative to change our constitution to show ID every chance you vote. It's in all of these different laws are designed around this idea that the big lie that there's voter fraud when there isn't. You know, as lieutenant governor in 2020, you know, I was one of the main faces pushing back against this, you know, lie and it just really insurrection is what it evolved into, is insurrection. You know, had 5 cases of voter fraud here in Pennsylvania. They were all Republicans voting for the former president fraudulently. They were all discovered. They were all prosecuted, and every single one of them is now on probation out of 7 million ballots cast. So, you know, if I had to pick one bill, you know, I can't pick between those two, because one's such a fundamentally, you know, economic challenge that we confront as a party, that we have a minimum wage in our Commonwealth, in our nation, that is just so inadequate. And then also, I mean, it's really the foundation of our democracy and voting, and how it's been under siege like no other time in states all across Pennsylvania. Those would be my 2 top co-equal priorities.
All right, and we know that raising the minimum wage is a priority in the state government as well here in Pennsylvania for many. So glad to hear you talk about that in terms of the federal minimum wage. So I'm, you know, grateful to be here today as moderator of this event with Indivisible, and in my role as the executive director of the New Pennsylvania Project. But I have another role, which is co-chair of Why Courts Matter Pennsylvania, where we have been advocating for the independence of our federal courts and also our state courts, and trying to really push back against the problematic judicial nominees that came out of the Trump administration. And we're still all very jubilant over here about the confirmation of now Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. And yes, it's an exciting moment, obviously, for those of us who worked in this space for a long time, still celebrating that. And, you know, there is the constitutional duty of a United States Senator to provide advice and consent as it relates to putting federal judges on our Pennsylvania federal courts, in our Third Circuit and in our district courts, and providing that advice and consent to the president, and also, you know, work within your fellow senators, working with Senator Bob Casey as it relates to putting the most qualified judges on our federal benches here for Pennsylvania. So I just want to ask you, you know, what does it look like to you? What would an excellent qualified judicial nominee look like to you to put on the federal bench for Pennsylvania?
I would say Justice Jackson is exactly the kind of person. I mean, supremely qualified. Those that are of course qualified, but also have a different perspective. They have a different life experience. They have an entirely different set of lived experiences that traditional judicial appointments in the past don't have. I think it's incredibly important that we increasingly enhance the diversity of our judiciary, and that would certainly be one of the factors, you know, I would be looking for, you know, if I was in that situation to advise or help confirm. And I just, you know, to back up, I just absolutely celebrate Joe Biden's commitment, or as a candidate, to appoint a Black woman to the Supreme Court. I mean, that was shamefully long overdue in this country, but it's been achieved. And I think it's a disgrace that you don't have to agree with Justice Jackson about all her politics, but at the end of the day, the fact that she was supremely qualified but still only got 3 Republican votes, I think speaks to just a lack of just basic decorum, or just this understanding that, you know, your president picked this judge. There's nothing disqualifying about this person, and to stand in the way of history like that, I don't understand that, and I never will. And so, you know, the kind of justices I would appoint are going to understand that we have to protect and uphold our democracy. We're going to have to uphold women's reproductive freedom. We are going to uphold basic ideas of money is a cancer in politics, as well too. This idea that Citizens United. I mean, there's so many different damaging court decisions that have really taken our country in an unfortunate direction. And the kind of judges that I would like to appoint would be in that mold, that they would be part of a next generation that would and could ultimately fill a Supreme Court justice position that would help our country turn some of these things back or affirm some of these core rights and values like Roe v. Wade that are currently endangered.
Part two to that is, there's opportunities to do some reform to our federal courts. Do you have any thoughts on court expansion or any other type of reform that we could bring to our federal courts, and term limits or any ethical guidelines for judges or justices?
Well, I will say, and this is controversial, the idea of expanding the U.S. Supreme Court. I as a candidate, don't support the expansion of this U.S. Supreme Court, even though I am deeply discouraged and upset by the current ideological makeup of it. I don't believe the expansion of the Supreme Court is the answer. Unfortunately, as a Democrat, I believe, we would not be clamoring for that if we had a significant majority the way the conservatives do. And Republicans are known increasingly for wanting to rewrite all the rules and change everything if there's an outcome that they don't like. They're trying to do it in our own state. In the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, they were talking about, changing how our Supreme Court justices are elected here in Pennsylvania through a constitutional amendment. And I was understandably upset about that. So, I may not approve or support the current ideological makeup, but I do not support, as they describe it, packing the court. I don't think it's called packing the court, but at the end of the day, and I understand why some people do. I've heard some very eloquent arguments as to expanding the Supreme Court, but then that could also, be used by Republicans to add 3 more. And then, when does it start? But I think it starts with appointing good quality federal judges that can ultimately go on to fill and also win in this seat. It's so important that we win this seat in order to be in that position. And we believe, given that control of the Senate could come down to this seat here in Pennsylvania, we believe we're an excellent opportunity for that pickup.
Well, I'm glad to hear you talk about, the fact that this is a seat that needs to be won in Pennsylvania to protect and defend democracy for various reasons, and how important it is that we do have another United States senator here who believes in our constitutional values. And so that brings me to this next question, and it's been posed to you numerous times, Lieutenant Governor, and I'm quite sure you're probably over, having to answer this question, but I want to pose it to you in a different way, in a more thoughtful way, so that we can really get a really good answer out of you here today. There's the jogger incident of 2013, right? And, those who don't know what I'm talking about now, feel free to Google here, but I just want to get into this question based upon the jogger incident, which is that no one in Pennsylvania is going to win a statewide election unless they have the support of the Black community. And we know that Republicans are inevitably going to bring this up in their campaign against you if you're chosen to be the candidate after this primary. How are you going to potentially speak to, the communities that are most impacted by what they saw or heard based upon that incident? How are you going to bring up around the Black community to cast a ballot for you on a statewide level? So we're talking about, Black folks across the state.
Sure. Well, first, it's important to acknowledge that the historical harm done to the Black community by racial profiling and over-policing. But I really want to emphasize that incident in 2013 had nothing to do with either of those. The important context with Braddock is that Braddock is a community that's about 75% Black. And, I went there over 20 years ago to help teach GED classes and help young people get their lives back on track. And specifically surrounding that incident, I was just out one day in the afternoon in the yard playing with my son, heard a burst of gunfire. As chief law enforcement officer, I made a split-second decision to get my son to safety, called 911, and I chose to intercept a lone individual, a masked individual, until the first responders could arrive. So, as mayor of as the 4-term mayor of a 75% Black community, I believe my record sets me apart in championing those issues that are critical as somebody who's represented a community like that for 14 years, and then moving on as lieutenant governor, championing second chances and trying to dismantle the death by incarceration apparatus here in Pennsylvania that disproportionately impacts people of color too, specifically those condemned to die in prison. Out of Philadelphia, 84% are Black, 72% in my home county of Allegheny. We're the first lieutenant governor that has been taking that on and enjoying a level of success that hasn't really been achieved since the late 1970s. So, we believe we have a very strong, record to run on, both in terms of stopping murders and confronting gun violence. My most proud accomplishment in Braddock was going 5.5 years without the loss of life through gun violence here in our community. And I'm proud to run on that record. So that contrast to Republicans, I think is going to be very strong as well too. With you have somebody like Dr. Oz or David McCormick versus someone who actually was in charge of a police department. So I just want to emphasize that incident had nothing to do with profiling. That incident had nothing to do with anything other than public safety. And the people of Braddock knew that. The people that live with me know me, where I still live today with my family. It never was an issue there, and they reelected me by an overwhelming margin 4 months after that and continued to reelect me. And I've been proud to serve as your lieutenant governor for the last nearly going on 4 years.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that question today. That brings me to, the fact that you have been part of the executive branch per se, right? As a mayor of a city, also as lieutenant governor. So you have a lot of experience in the executive branch, and this position as U.S. Senator is the legislative branch. And so how are you going to be able to adjust or handle the change of pace or the scope going from the executive branch and going into the legislative branch into making laws? How are you going to adjust to that change?
I think it'd be a natural transition. I think one of the best preparations you possibly can have for the executive branch or the legislative branch is a small town mayor, and you understand and you see that when you're responsible for getting things done on the grassroots level, what kind of laws, what kind of constituent services, and what kind of policies are actually needed. It is often involves working in a bipartisan manner that sometimes breaks down at the highest levels, but on the local level, we all have to live together and get along. And I think it's the values more than anything than the straight legislative experience too. And I have a documented history of committed to good, progressive, democratic values in my public service, whether it was a GED instructor and a program director, here helping young people get their lives together, whether it was a small town mayor confronting gun violence and crime, or as lieutenant governor, helping our Commonwealth through the pandemic during COVID-19, or again, reimagining the pardons process here in Pennsylvania, and doing work that had never been conceptualized, let alone accomplished in the arena of granting second chances here, and also championing, though ending the war on drugs here in Pennsylvania, specifically around marijuana. When I started, I was called crazy, you're a stoner, you're a liar, and now Republicans, legislators in the PA Senate are now introducing their own bills calling for the legalization of it, and they're using a lot of the same language and the same rationale that I started with. So, leadership that you learn in the executive wing is very useful in helping spur development of important legislation.
All right. So we have a former president of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Trump recently endorsed Dr. Oz to be the U.S. Senate candidate. How are you most positioned to take on Dr. Oz? What makes you the most positioned to face him in a general election?
Whether it's Dr. Oz or David McCormick, I think we're in really excellent shape, because neither one of those individuals actually live in Pennsylvania or have any real history here in Pennsylvania. And I think that matters. I also that none of them have done any real campaigning. All they've done is bought television ads and tried to raise their name ID, whereas we have existing relationships in all of Pennsylvania's 67 counties. We've been to every county multiple times during our 3 statewide runs, and we have a built-in infrastructure and an actual campaign apparatus. It's not just writing big checks, getting ourselves up on TV, although we are the only Democratic campaign that is up on TV statewide as well too. And we've also, can flip that map and appeal in areas that they are going to need to run the table in the deep red counties in order to win statewide here in Pennsylvania. And we believe that we'll be able to blunt those margins and pick up and dominate in areas that would prevent them from winning. So we feel very good. In fact, our own internal polls, and Match Event actually, an internal poll of one of our Democratic opponents shows us beating Dr. Oz by 9 points. So we believe if Dr. Oz is the nominee, we would be able to flip this seat. He's, I don't think somebody that I would take seriously in the sense that, a celebrity, oddball TV doctor. I think majority of Pennsylvanians want somebody who's thoughtful, serious, that lives here, has a history of actually understanding what the people of Pennsylvania want and really are about.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think we have time for one more additional question because we're running kind of fast here. So I'm going to ask you a question about Ukraine because it's obviously on the minds of so many. And so in regards to the war in Ukraine and the unbridled aggression from Russian leader Vladimir Putin, how do you feel about the response of the United States and NATO thus far?
I think President Biden has done an excellent job in terms of marshaling essentially unanimous support for sanctions that have really helped hobble the Russian economy. I think that, and first and foremost, to make sure that we impose the strongest penalties possible on the Russian economy to make sure that they are paying a really very high price for their absolutely heinous war and invasion of Ukraine. Second of all, I think all of the military aid recently they just added an additional $800 million in military aid is the right move. And humanitarian aid or military aid up to, but not to that red line of where we are in danger of triggering a hot war in Ukraine. We just can't afford that. And this idea that, we all want to help Ukraine. We all want Russia out and we all want Ukraine to win and be able to rebuild. But the truth of the matter is a hot war with Russia would be catastrophic for the world, but no more catastrophic for anyone than the people of Ukraine themselves. So what Vladimir Putin is doing is awful. He's a war criminal, and I hope one day he's held accountable for what he's done. But in the meantime, help as much as we can, impose the toughest sanctions possible, but be mindful, and I applaud President Biden for this commitment to make sure we do not slide into a situation that could escalate into World War III or a hot war.
All right. And here's our final set of questions. And thank you again for your time this afternoon. You talked a lot about your experience and being the mayor of a small town, your experience of being lieutenant governor here under Governor Wolf. I'd love to hear from you if you want to tell us a little bit about what you believe to be your proudest moment as lieutenant governor while, in Harrisburg. What's been your proudest moment as being lieutenant governor? And then conversely, what's been the toughest lesson that you've learned about your time in office in Harrisburg?
Sure. My proudest moments are the reason why I'm recording this right now instead of being able to participate live. My proudest moment is seeing innocent or otherwise deeply deserving people not dying in prison here in our Commonwealth. Whether it's Lee and Dennis Horton, innocent brothers from Philadelphia that lost 28 years of their lives convicted of a crime they didn't commit, or Naomi Blunt of Strawberry Mansion as well too, who was forensically exonerated by a judge in 1985, yet spent 38 years of her life behind bars. It's devastating. what has happened, but the fact that they are free because of our efforts, and the most people have gotten a second chance since, combining every lieutenant governor administration combined back to 1978. You have to go back to Milton Schaap to match those numbers. So that's probably my proudest moment, is knowing that innocent or otherwise deserving people do not have to die in prison. The hardest part of it is when I don't have the votes, or I'm unable to get or achieve a unanimous outcome where people that I strongly believe should not be dying in prison, I'm not able to get them out as well too. These are incredibly high stakes propositions, and I've always said and believe that mercy should be a partner to justice. And right now we are currently not there yet, in my opinion, here in the Commonwealth. And one of the legacies that I want to leave behind during my time as lieutenant governor is this idea of getting rid of second-degree murder. And we have done more than any lieutenant governor in the history of Pennsylvania to really put that idea front and center, in the hopes that we are not needlessly condemning people to die in prison, especially when they didn't take a life. So it's something that is so deeply personal to me that if I was able to do it for the rest of my life, I would. I think that we spend billions on punishment in Pennsylvania, but so little on redemption or second chances or exoneration. And I think that should change.
Your answer for what's been the toughest lesson is just how hard it has been to change as it relates to that issue, or is there been another issue? It's been another tough lesson that you've had to learn in your role as lieutenant governor?
Yeah, I would just say that it's the legislative process is slow, and when you are not in control of the legislature, you really can't get anything passed. I mean, there's any number of things that are deeply frustrating, whether it's our inability to raise the minimum wage, whether it's our inability to grant basic fundamental human rights, to our gay and trans communities here in Pennsylvania. Just simple tweaks of language that should give these communities what they should have always had throughout our history. It's like an ongoing frustration that these basic things of fairness and equity, I wouldn't even call them political. I think it's self-evident. Like, you can't live on $7.25 an hour, and we should equal protection under the law. It's fundamental. Those are the most frustrating lessons, or the frustrating realities, that things that should be outside the political back and forth, we're still tied up in that because we don't have control.
Well, thank you for your time this afternoon, Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. It was a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you for your thoughtful answers. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you for allowing me to record this in advance. When this airs, know that I'll be in the company of individuals that hopefully will be able to provide a second chance to, that they're deserving, and they'll be reducing our prison population, but also being able to return back to their communities and resume their life. So thank you for having me, and see you out in the field.
Thank you very much. All right. I hope you all enjoyed that recording. As you just heard from Lieutenant Governor Fetterman, he was unable to join us this evening, still working in his official capacity, but he did want to make sure that he sent that message out to everyone. And so hopefully you all learned something from that segment of going back and forth with Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. So we're going to move on now, because we do have two more candidates with us this evening for the United States Senate representing Pennsylvania. And so we will be joined by Representative Malcolm Kenyatta in just a moment. He is here today in the Zoom room. And I just want to mention what you're going to experience the rest of the evening here. And so this is a forum, this is not a debate. And so we'll be asking 7 questions of both Representative Malcolm Kenyatta and also Congressman Connor Lamb. Some of those questions will be the same questions, and there'll be similar questions that you heard that we asked Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. And then a few of the questions are specifically for the candidates. And so I just want to make sure you understand that as we go forward. And so now I want to just bring on, if I can, we have State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta with us today. And are you there? Yes. Okay, there he is. Good to see you, Representative Malcolm Kenyatta. Good to see
You
you today.
too. Good to be with you. Good to be
Yeah.
with you.
Well, we're going to kick this. We're going to get right into this. We want to make sure we have some equal time for everyone,
Yep.
Representative. And so we went on for about 28 minutes with that recording there with Lieutenant Governor Fetterman. So we have, like I mentioned, 7 questions for you this evening. So if you can give us about a 2-minute answer each time, that would be great. So we can stay on time here.
Fantastic.
All right. All right. So the first question for you this evening, good to see you. Number 1, I don't want to have to read your all bios. I think you can tell us what your bio is in these introductory questions. And so I'll kick it right to that first question this evening. And that is, just tell us a little something about yourself and why you decided to run for United States Senate representing Pennsylvania.
Well, first of all, thank you. I miss seeing you around the Capitol in your old role, but so incredibly grateful for the work that you're doing with the New Pennsylvania Project. So I just want to plug that and just thank you for your leadership. For me, I got involved in politics really for self-preservation. I grew up in North Philadelphia in a working poor family. My dad was a social worker. My mom was a home healthcare aide. And, they were the best of the best people. They just did not like each other. So they separated when I was pretty young. And so what that meant for me is, I lived 6 different places by the time I graduated high school. Got my first job at the age of 12, washing dishes at this little vegan soul food restaurant. And I buried both of my parents by the time I was 27. But I've been thinking a lot about this story of the first thing I ever did civically. I was 11 or 12 and living on this block in my now State House district on Woodstock Street. And I remember coming home one day just complaining to my mama about all the stuff that was happening on the block, the trash, the blight, whatever. And my mom, I'll never forget, was smoking a cigarette in the kitchen. And she said, boy, if you care so much, why don't you go do something about it? And so I ran for junior block captain. And I think that same message from my mom of go do something about it rings true for me right now, where what I call America's basic bargain is more and more out of reach for people. This idea that you can have one good job backed up by a union, that you have a level of certainty that your kids are going to get a quality education in your community at a good, fully funded school, the security and knowing that if you get sick, you can actually go to the dang doctor and be able to fill the prescription when you leave. And then about being able to retire with a level of dignity in a house you were able to afford in the first place, in a community that's safe and clean. That wasn't real for my family. It's not real for a lot of families. But as my mama said, if you care so much, we have to do something about it. And certainly that has been what Indivisible has been all about. Regular people deciding to actually get involved and saying, hey, we're going to do something about it. And that's what my campaign has been about.
Outstanding. Okay. First question of the evening. And we asked this question of Lieutenant Governor Fetterman as well. You're going to, when you are elected, right, we're on the presumption that you will be elected in the general election, what would be the piece of legislation you'd like to see moved first? In that first 100 days of the new Congress, what piece of legislation would you like to see moved immediately?
So if we do not secure the right to vote in a significant way, not just the right to vote, but the right for your vote to count, and for it to not be in a gerrymandered district. We don't do that. First of all, we should have done it before this election that we're about to have here. We should do it before the November election. Passing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, passing the For the People Act, and I'm fine with the Freedom to Vote Act, but the For the People Act had within it also a number of, in my view, critical reforms, campaign finance reforms, as well as making sure we set a serious floor for states in terms of a certain amount of days of early voting, being able to actually register in a timely manner, being able to make sure that people have the option to vote safely from home, dealing with the gerrymandering and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. These are all things that are critical and that we all know are necessary, and that frankly, not the first person to say we should have done this a long time ago, but that is the reality. We should have done it a long time ago, but my hope would be that as your next United States Senator, it would be something we do very rapidly in the first 100 days.
All right, thank you for that answer. You know, we're still in joyful mode over here, particularly those of us who have worked in the Why Courts Matter field and, advocacy and trying to make sure that we have a federal court and also our state courts that are representative of this country. And so as we still celebrate the confirmation of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, you know, I must ask you this question as that relates to our federal courts. And I've watched a few of the previous debates. And so I know you all have answered these questions in various ways. And so I'll try to put it in a different way so that we can get a different type of answer out of all of you this evening. But you know that in the role of a United States Senator, it is your constitutional duty to provide advice and consent and to work with the senior senator, Senator Bob Casey, as it relates to approving blue slips and making sure that the judges that will represent Pennsylvania on our Third Circuit Court of Appeals and also on our lower courts, our district courts, are those who will represent Pennsylvanians. And so my question for you this evening is, what does a good federal judge look like to you? We know that Supreme Court justices come from someplace, right? They come from the lower courts. They come from the district courts. They come from the circuit courts of appeals. What type of jurist are you going to put your blue slip in for as it relates to the lower courts? What are you looking for? What is the the experience that you're looking for in a jurist?
You know, so that's an incredible question. And, you know, I had the great honor, and it's something I'll never forget for the rest of my life, of being at the White House after that confirmation at the celebration that was had on the South Lawn, and watching in real time Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson make incredible history. And frankly, she shouldn't be the last one. We know that there are a variety of different perspectives that are absent from the bench. And this is one of the real bright spots, frankly, in the last, year and some change, since the Democrats have been in control of the Senate. I think as of today, we have 60 folks who've been approved for lifetime appointments, the fastest clip that we've seen. And I think a lot of the folks who you've seen the president nominate for these positions fit the bill and the mode of what I would be looking for. You've seen him nominate a number of people who have who've worked as defense attorneys. You've seen a number of people who've worked for low income or indigenous defendants as well. Those types of perspectives are critical, especially as so many questions continue to bubble up, especially as we talk about criminal justice reform. Having people who have been at the defense side of the table, who are looking at how we protect the rights of folks who are charged with a crime, that's really important perspective that so often we don't look for on the bench. You're looking for people who have actually tried cases. One of the things that was so frustrating about the Trump administration was that you had a number of people who got lifetime appointments who had never tried a case. I mean, that is absurd that you get to have a lifetime appointment to the court, and the first time you walk in is to be a judge. That is not how it should work, in my view. You also want to make sure that we're putting people on the bench who are qualified by the Bar Association. Another thing that we did not see from a lot of the folks who were appointed in the previous administration. And so I'm looking for a diversity of lived experience. I'm looking for people who have a variety of different ways that they've been involved in the field. And I think that, again, we've seen a premium put on people who've stood up for low income and indigenous folks, which I think makes a lot of sense as well. And also, obviously, you want to see people who, by virtue of what they have said, and you'll go through, and I would go through and read all their speeches, look at all the things that they have, put out online. You want people who, through their words, even though they can't tell you how they're going to rule in a specific case, where you get a real understanding that they have a respect for the law and have a respect for precedent. That includes things like Roe v. Wade, which I said just a couple of days ago is a litmus test for me. People who think that things like same-sex marriage are settled law. Brown v. Board. You want people who have a real respect for settled law, but who understand that our Constitution are living, breathing documents, and that jurists, while they should not be making laws, certainly should be viewing the law through that lens.
All right. There's a part two to this. If you can just quickly give me a little bit about this, because, hearing the debates just the other day, we know that there's a disagreement between the candidates about whether or not the court should be expanded. So we get that already. My question to you is, I think about the wife of Clarence Thomas, Jenny Thomas, and everything that came out of that situation. So I guess my question to you is, what kind of reform do you think should be made to the courts? We already know that you are in favor of expanding the courts, but what other type of maybe ethical guidelines should be established, or should there be terms to federal judges, and rather than having lifetime appointments?
So I think that there's a variety of different things that you can do. As you mentioned, I do think I'm the only person who thinks we should expand the court. I think it's the right thing to do. It's what has happened multiple times in our nation's history, and you highlight the fact that we see real levels of, I want to choose my words carefully here, but certainly impropriety that we've seen, and the behavior and just the documentation that we've gotten so far as it relates to Jenny Thomas makes it very clear that she was deeply involved in a plan to try to overturn the election. That should trouble every single one of us. I know that there's a bill moving right now that will require the federal judges to put online their statements of financial interest, the way that other, federal or even candidates for federal office. I've had to do that just as a candidate for federal office. It is certainly something, it's not too much to ask for that same documentation to be available to the general public, especially when the court could potentially rule on issues that come before them where they might have interest. And right now, we just have to trust that they will recuse themselves in those instances. But I'd rather verify and then, trust but verify.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So here's a question for you specifically. There are many U.S. senators who have been state lawmakers before going to Washington, but few have made the leap directly from state assembly to the United States Senate. How have you arrived at your decision to run for office for the United States Senate representing Pennsylvania in this moment in your political career?
Yeah, so you're right. That's true. We need to change that, and we have a chance here in a couple of days. And some of you may already have your ballots, and obviously, I want you to vote for me. I think I'm at a point where I have the right balance of what I think we need in this moment. I've been a legislator. I've worked around campaigns. I've been an activist who's been deeply involved in the policy conversations that have been going on. But I resisted for a long time this idea that I was going to actually run for office myself. But what I came to understand is that if the people who are most impacted don't step up and run themselves, there's going to be a limit to the ways in which we're going to see government deliver for the people I think it must deliver for. I also will tell you that sometimes in politics, people spend so much time climbing the ladder that the altitude does something to their brain that they forget while they're climbing. What we need in our next United States Senator is not somebody who's been in an elected office for a certain amount of time. We need somebody who understands in their bones what is broken and who's laid out a clear plan on what we're going to do to fix it. And I talked about America's basic bargain. I know what it means when government delivers on those things or doesn't. And we need more senators who understand that as well. And so if we're going to change the Senate, we have to change the senators. And I would ask folks, how has it served us to have the same types of people elected every time? The same types of resumes over and over and over again. How has that served us? I mean, if it was working out for us, that would be one thing, but it's not working. And so clearly we need new blood. We need a fresh vision. We need somebody who's not beholden to anybody but you. And that's what I offer in this race.
All right. Speaking of your, your tenure as state representative, representing parts of Philadelphia, I'd love to hear from you this evening, what measures you've taken, what bills and initiatives you've sponsored or supported that's directly impacted your district. It's an opportunity to talk about the work that you've done as a state representative.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. One of the things I'm always so proud of are the services that we provide from our office. And we're always, leading the way in terms of getting people through unemployment, getting folks housing, helping provide all those basic state services. And we get metrics every month as legislators of how many people have you served in your office? How do you compare to, your colleagues and folks in the caucus? And we are consistently at the top of that list. And I'm very proud of that because we're in a district where the Fair Hill section of my district, for instance, the average median income, we're talking about $10,333 a year. And think about that for a second. So what I know is that we need to, in lieu of being able to pass the type of big transformational legislation that we would be able to pass if Democrats were in control of the House of Representatives, in lieu of that, you can provide good services. You can bring money home to the district. I mean, just yesterday, we announced $3.5 million that came back to the district that's going to go to a variety of different projects. One to Salvation Army, which helps folks who are housing insecure, women who are fleeing domestic abuse, primarily women, but not only women who are fleeing domestic violence. And we got, $1 million to them to help them build out and also do repairs in that facility that's caring for folks who are in desperate need of care. The R.W. Brown Community Center, which has in it a pre-K program, does after-school programs, is a real hub in my district for a variety of different things. They're going to be making their building more energy efficient. Pardon me, fixing their HVAC system, especially as we've all gone through this COVID pandemic together. We need to make sure that air is filtrating and that our kids are safe. And they're going to be making all these repairs. And we advocated and fought for those resources to come home. Of course, I've been on the front lines of making sure we get resources home to deal with the crisis of gun violence that we are seeing in our street. So many people who come from communities like mine and frankly, who look like me, who are being murdered in our street every single day at historic numbers that are incredibly painful. And we've been doing everything we can to get resources to try to disrupt those cycles of violence before they take another life. And we're really proud of that work. From a legislative front, I'll just pick three areas. One, hardening our digital infrastructure, dealing with cybersecurity issues. I have been now for multiple years the Pennsylvania representative to NCLS, which is our National Conference of State Legislatures, around cybersecurity. And I was appointed to that position by Speaker Turzai, okay? And we were not like best friends, but hardening our digital infrastructure, making sure your private information is secure is something that is a bipartisan thing that we ought to be focused on. Criminal justice reform has been another area, and I have a number of bills that I've sponsored in that regard. And then I talk a lot about Phillips Law, a bill that I introduced with the Republican to reimagine the way we provide mental health care for our kids after, my district suffered the tragic loss of an 11-year-old who died by suicide. We started to look at what can we do to make sure our kids aren't just getting the equal funding that they need in their schools in terms of books and that they're in a school where there's not lead, asbestos, and mold, like that's the floor. But also we know, and anybody who's a parent who's listening right now, your kids getting back into school or educators who are on the call as well. I have heard consistently about the need for more robust social and emotional supports for our young people, and this pandemic has exacerbated that.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to give you 60 seconds for this next question. And this was a question asked of Lieutenant Governor as well. And that is that Donald J. Trump, has endorsed Dr. Oz to be his pick for the United States Senate. I want to ask you what makes you most positioned to go up against someone such as a Dr. Oz if you do win the candidacy here to go into the general election?
The only thing that beats a lie is the truth. And the only thing that's going to beat a fraud is a real person. Not only am I from Pennsylvania, which again should be the floor for our senator, but there is a real contrast between somebody like Dr. Oz, who has spent his life jet setting around, giving out bad medical advice, and somebody like me, who spent my time driving around Pennsylvania talking about how we make all the things I mentioned in that basic bargain real for people, somebody who's been on the front line fighting for working families like my own. And I will also say, everybody's been seeing these reports of the groups who are going to be most at risk of not showing up in this election: young people, voters of color, our base in places like Philadelphia and southeastern Pennsylvania. These are people who, yeah, they would vote for the Democrat, but that's if they vote. And we have shown repeatedly to be the person who's best positioned to bring those voters out, as well as to be the person who can do incredibly well with those Trump Biden voters. Axios has focus group where they've been looking at this, talking to Trump Biden voters, and the number one word they chose for Dr. Oz was fraud. When they asked about this Democratic primary, people split right down the line between me or John Fetterman. So I think that, we have a real ability to not just reach the voters who are ours, who we need to turn out, but also to reach voters who are looking for somebody who's authentic and real.
I'm going to change course here for a moment and talk a little bit about, more globally about what's going on in the world, and all of our thoughts and prayers and hopes for peace are still with the people of Ukraine in regard to the war in Ukraine. And so we still have this aggression from Russian leader Vladimir Putin. And, I'm just curious from your perspective, how you feel as though the United States is handling this, how NATO is handling this thus far. And should we hold Putin accountable for his war crimes? Would you support with the international community a criminal court in holding him accountable?
So he has to be held accountable for his barbaric, senseless invasion that has cost too many lives. I actually have a pretty robust Ukrainian population in my district. The Archdiocese for the Ukrainian Catholic Church is in my district. And, I've talked to Father Petula, who's the rector there, and also to the Archbishop, who, ironically enough, is the Archbishop for our area, but also is their version of a Secretary of State, kind of, for the Ukrainian Catholic Church. And he has been all over trying to muster up support to welcome in refugees and to get financial assistance, whatever the case may be, but obviously also just being a moral leader. And it was so incredible hearing him in his homily talk about, in this moment where people he knew who have been murdered or who he could not, when I saw him get in contact with them, and who, he assumes have lost their lives, still talking about forgiveness. That is the strength of these folks who we have, who I have gotten to know. That is their strength. And it has allowed them to, in an incredibly tough circumstance, push back against one of the most powerful militaries in the world. And they've done that with significant support from the United States, who just last week allocated even more money to Ukraine. The president just today allocated more money to deal with the refugee crisis and around food insecurity, because Ukraine is such an important part of getting food out to parts of the world where we're seeing mass levels of starvation. And so the United States is stepping up. And so I think we're doing the right thing. I think we need to make sure we're continuing to give them a robust assortment of defensive and offensive weapons, that we continue to isolate Vladimir Putin and to document his abundant amount of war crimes so that ultimately he can be held accountable in the ICC.
All right. We're doing phenomenally on time here. And so you had the full 2.5 minutes here to answer this last question of the evening, State Representative. So this is the last question of the evening for you. And that is that, I want to give you this opportunity to talk about, what you found to be the toughest lessons that you've learned in your time in Harrisburg. And then finish us out by letting us know what you've been most proud of in your time in Harrisburg and the work that you've done as state representative. So let's start with what's been toughest, and then let's close it out with what you're most proud of.
Well, let me say thank you to you again, and I'm just going to end with another shout out for the New Pennsylvania Project. Incredibly important work. The thing that has been toughest is knowing that so many of my Republican colleagues don't believe the things that they say publicly. It's really painful to watch, actually, because, and I'm not going to name names, but you talk to some of these folks outside of the context of, the cameras are off and we're in Harrisburg. And I think so many of them know that they are being more and more held hostage because of a lie that they told, and not just the big lie, but a variety of different lies that they've told over the years to avoid primaries. And they have emboldened a ideology and a movement within their party that is going to make it more difficult for us to seriously address the concerns that we have, because we're not even able to debate along, a fact-based way. We're not able to say you want 7%, I want 5%, here's empirical data of how that's going to work or not work. We're not having the type of real serious conversations and trying to answer the most serious questions that voters have. And that's painful to watch. The thing that it's been I'm most proud of are the moments where, in spite of that, we've been able to try to advance legislation that is meaningful. There's some bipartisan gun safety legislation, which I've, co-sponsored. I mentioned Phillips Law, mentioned some criminal justice reform. But the final thing I'll say in that regard is it's so difficult for people to be something they can't see. And it's not lost on me that not only am I the second African American to ever even run for the US Senate on the Democratic side in Pennsylvania history, I'm the first openly gay man who will be on a ballot for the US Senate in American history, anywhere. And I get messages all the time from folks who talk about what that means for them and how it has encouraged them and inspired them to get involved. I have not bought what I've often heard, that Pennsylvania is just not ready to elect a Black gay guy from North Philly. I don't think that that's true. I don't think that just because somebody's from a small community, they're racist. I think that people want somebody who's going to actually understand their life and who they can trust to fight for them. And there are people who come from a variety of different backgrounds who fit that bill, who ought to be running for school board, for whatever they want to run for, but especially school board right now. And so I'm grateful to all of you and grateful to the Indivisible community. And thank you so much for letting me be a part of this conversation.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That is State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta, who is asking for your vote. And thank you for being with us this evening. Enjoyed our time with you. All right. So that was State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta. And now we're moving on to our final candidate of the evening, and that is Congressman Connor Lamb, who was with us in the Zoom room. Thanks so much for being with us today, Congressman. Glad to see you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
All right. So just so you understand how this is working this evening, Congressman, is that we are asking 7 questions of you tonight. Most of them are the same questions we're asking of everyone. We asked them of Representative Kenyatta. We've asked the same questions of Lieutenant Governor Fetterman, but we do have a few questions that are specifically for you, and you'll probably figure those out when I ask these questions. But I want to give you the opportunity, because we're not reading bios this evening. We can have folks read your bios, but if you want to just open us up for the first 2 minutes here and just tell us why you've decided to run to represent Pennsylvanians in the United States Senate.
Yeah, thank you. And, a lot of you are people who've helped me in all 3 of my congressional races. So I always want to let you know how much I appreciate the hard work that you put in. From my first campaign until now, I believe that you all deserve a win. You deserve to win for how hard you work in these campaigns. And so I'm someone who I think I can give you the best chance to win this thing in the general election. As far as why I'm running for the Senate, I've been in the House for 4 years, and unfortunately, there just hasn't been a path forward in the Senate for most of the great legislation that we've passed. And I think while we may lose the House in one cycle or another, we're going to hold it a lot of the time just based on how it's structured. The Senate is not that. If we do not win this seat, we're just not going to get a Voting Rights Act. We're not going to get a Women's Health Protection Act. We're not going to get a substantial minimum wage increase or a Build Back Better Act or a PRO Act. So I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that this Senate race is probably one of the most important elections that are going to take place in this country in this decade. I mean, not even just in this cycle. And I think the experience that I've had out in Western Pennsylvania has really prepared me to do that well for you and do the job well also. So I'll stop there. I want to have maximum time for your questions. So.
All right, great. All right, so let's get right into the questions. And the first one's an easy one. And that is that obviously, if you are selected by the Democrats who will be voting on May 17th or earlier, we would like to know what it is that you're going to see as the first piece of legislation you'd like to see moved in that first 100 days. If it's possible, what would be that one piece of legislation you'd like to see moved in your first 100 days in the United States Senate?
I mean, if I really had my choice, the thing that I don't think gets enough attention is our bill to raise Social Security benefits. It's called Social Security 2100. It's actually one of the few things that we have not gotten out of the House of Representatives, because even some conservative Democrats are afraid to call for a tax increase. But this is one area that I think is a slam dunk. It just lifts the wage cap for Social Security for anyone making more than $500,000 a year, so that they have to pay the same rate in the Social Security year round. Just for reference, a millionaire in the United States, someone who earns $1 million, they stop paying Social Security on Valentine's Day every year. So they basically pay for a little over a month. Whereas working people pay the full year round. If you just make that one change, you could raise everybody's Social Security benefits. And when you spend a lot of time with seniors, as I do, you know that one of their greatest frustrations is when they even get a cost of living adjustment, the Medicare premium increase goes up by the same exact amount. And so they never get any further ahead. And now with inflation, like I did a bunch of appearances at grocery stores today here in Philadelphia, people are paying more literally every single time they go to the grocery store. Just that one change of increasing people's Social Security checks would be a huge benefit to people on a fixed income. So I would pick that first.
All right. So, we're still in celebration mode as it relates to Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, and you're being joined this evening. Yes, there's, more than 200 people in the Zoom room right now who I believe we're all very excited and very joyful about the first Black woman being placed, being appointed and confirmed to sit on the United States Supreme Court. And so my question for you this evening around that is that, it is your role, your constitutional role as a U.S. Senator, to provide advice and consent, work in coordination with the senior senator, being Senator Bob Casey, and to provide a blue slip and to make sure that the folks that you'd like to move through to sit on our lower courts, to sit on our district courts, to sit on our Third Circuit Court of Appeal is someone that could be representative of Pennsylvanians. We definitely have an opportunity there. We have yet to have a Black woman or any woman of color actually sit on Third Circuit here in Pennsylvania for Pennsylvania. And so I want to ask you, when you envision, someone that you would provide your blue slip for, someone that you like to see be put on a lower court bench, even onto the Supreme Court bench of the United States, what kind of qualifications are you going to look for? I mean, we know you as being a prosecutor, and what was so celebratory about Ketanji Brown Jackson is that she played the other side of that and being a public defender. And so I want to ask you, what is it that you're going to see as someone who would fill your qualifications to sit on a lower court bench here representing Pennsylvania on the federal courts?
Absolutely. And first, I just want to say this one is a little bit personal to me. Most people wouldn't know this because it wasn't big news, but the whole time I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Pittsburgh, there was a Black woman in our office who had been put forward to be on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Senate would not move on her nomination as part of Republican intransigence against President Obama. She now is in the private sector, and I don't know if she would get renominated again, but she was one of the finest lawyers I knew, somebody that I went to regularly she was a mentor of mine. I mean, so I just hated the fact that she was put through that, because I don't think that would have happened if she was a white man. As far as what I would be looking for, to me, a background in public service in some form is very important. I thought that was one of the best things about now Justice Jackson's background, and one of the worst things about how she was treated is they treated the fact that she was a public defender like it was somehow disloyal to the United States, which is the complete opposite. I mean, John Adams made a name for himself in America defending the British soldiers of the Boston Massacre. Like, it's one of the most important parts of the legal profession to be able to take unpopular positions on behalf of your clients. So I think we need more people of that background, whether prosecutor or defense or civil legal defense or both. Obviously, diversity in terms of race and gender, whether or not you or your parents were born in this country. All of those things are very important, just to help you understand the people whose cases that you're going to be deciding. And then, we shouldn't have to say it, but we do have to say it now, which is just sort of fidelity to the Constitution and a lot of the Supreme Court decisions that have really shaped modern American life. So, Roe v. Wade at this point is almost 50 years old. It has been reaffirmed and upheld in the federal courts probably hundreds of thousands of times. It's as ironclad as Brown v. Board of Education, for example, or the fact that you get a Miranda warning if you get arrested. So the fact that this court thinks that it can all of a sudden, on very spurious grounds, just overturn it, it places a lot about our constitutional system at risk if they can do that kind of thing. And so I'm not big on the idea of litmus tests, but part of how you think if you want to be a judge has to be respect for and adherence to the most sort of firmly grounded constitutional decisions. So I would have to ask nominees about issues like Roe v. Wade or Brown v. Board or things that we would have taken for granted even 5 or 10 years ago.
Part two to this question, and I'm glad you have brought up Rebecca Haywood, because those of us who were doing lots of advocacy work around that knew that Rebecca Haywood was ready to be a federal judge, and it was unfortunate that Senator Toomey did not feel the same way. But
and she still is ready, just saying. I'm not making any promises, but she still is ready.
So the second part to this question, we've heard some of the debates already, so we know where you stand as it relates to expanding the court. We know that you and Lieutenant Governor Fetterman are in the same position, and we have Malcolm Kenyatta feeling differently about that. I want to ask you about ethical guidelines. And, is it possible that we should have some court reforms as it relates to ethical guidelines, as it relates to term limits? Where do you stand there?
Yeah, I think term limits, we could definitely look at. The sort of legal issue with term limits is I think it might require a constitutional amendment, which makes these things almost impossible. But if there was a way to do it, I would certainly be interested in it. The ethical stuff, yes. And that the House Judiciary Committee, in my chamber is already starting to look at this and see if they can, put forward some things specifically in reaction to Ginny Thomas. And they're going to need some partners in the Senate. I have not been on the Judiciary Committee in the House, but it's my goal to join it in the Senate. And, hopefully I can be part of reforming that side of things.
All right. Thank you for that. All right, so this question is for you directly, and that is that you have frequently advocated the importance of bipartisanship, particularly in your involvement with the Problem Solvers Caucus. What is your plan for pursuing that goal when most Senate Republicans don't share the same level of commitment that you do, perhaps?
Sure. One thing I want to just preface this with, because it might be relevant to more than one answer for me tonight. I just want you all to remember that the one thing that I bring to this race that the other two candidates don't, and that a lot of candidates you've seen don't, is the fact that I have had to go out and really on the ground spend a lot of time at the doorsteps of swing voters, in rooms full of them, independents, Republicans, disaffected Democrats, whoever they are. I mean, thousands and thousands of conversations with these people. And the one most common theme that you get out of that is that they think people go to Washington just to kind of get famous on TV and social media, and to do that by fighting with each other without actually trying to deliver any sort of result. And so the number one thing that people ask you for when you are in a district like mine is not a specific policy area, but just, can you please go down there and try to work with people to get things done, work with the other side, work with your side, whatever the case. You hear it so often from the poorest neighborhood in your district to the wealthiest, that you realize there's kind of this larger sense out there that people are looking for us to try. And so the reason that that's relevant to my work is it's not like I think that I'm going to get Jim Jordan or Steve Scalise or Matt Gaetz or someone like that to work with me on a bill. It's that for that small group, there were 10 House Republicans that voted to impeach the second time. There were 13 who voted for the infrastructure bill. In the Problem Solvers Caucus that I'm in, there's 29. Small numbers in the run of the House, but doing the work that it takes to get them on a bill conveys something to your constituents that there really is no other way to convey. And that's one of the reasons that I think Biden prioritized infrastructure, and now this innovation and competition thing that we're doing with China. There's just a certain portion of the country that still really wants to see that and believe in it. And by the way, like it is a way, it's an efficient way to get legislation passed, which is our job at the end of the day. So I'm not naive enough to tell you that I think I'm going to change a lot of them, but the price that we have to pay for the small fraction is worthwhile, especially if we get rid of the filibuster. Now, remember, I'm for getting rid of the filibuster. So I don't think we're going to get to 60 on most issues, but I think we can get to 52 to 55 on a lot of issues and convey something then about our style of governing that's important.
So, I want to further this conversation because, as I'm here tonight with the Indivisible group, and, they've been tracking the progress and the votes of our U.S. Congress folks. And so you are someone they have tracked because you are the only member of the United States Congress running in this primary. And so you're the one candidate in tonight's forum that's actually received a scorecard from the
I've been
Pennsylvania
tracked.
Indivisible.
All right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
scored.
So you've received the scorecard rating from the Pennsylvania Indivisibles for this 117th Congress, you have a 100% rating,
Wow.
along with the other Democrats in the House, for your votes on bills that touch on equity, justice, compassion, and inclusion. But the same can't be said on how you voted in your first year in Congress, when Republicans were setting the agenda. And so many of the Indivisible folks want to hear from you tonight about, how they feel uncomfortable with some current Democratic senators, and they've been mentioned in previous debates. I heard Fetterman go on about Manchin with you the other night. But in light of these concerns, how do you frame your past voting record in the 115th Congress? And how would that change you in the future if you're going to deal with another Republican-led Congress? How are you going to continue to vote? Are you going to continue to get this 100% scorecard that you've received from Indivisible?
Thank you. I don't know, because I didn't even know that the scorecard existed until right now. So first of all, every vote that I cast, I try to think about my own constituents and my own values, of course, and use my best judgment. One of the reasons that these numbers can vary a lot from Congress to Congress is because it matters a lot who's in the majority and who's in the White House. And this is the first time that we've had both the majority and the White House. And so if you think about it, if I'm doing my job the way you want me to do my job, I should have 100%. And the reason for that is that if there's something I oppose or have a problem with it, one of the reasons that that I'm not Joe Manchin is you don't ever see me out in public making some huge stand to block something. It's not my style. My goal is always to move forward and get to yes. And the question is simply whether they'll listen to me and give me a chance to get it to yes. And so my work really is behind the scenes to make sure before anything ever gets to the floor, that my work has been done to try to make it something I can support. With us in both the majority and the White House, that's a lot easier to do. In the last Congress, we were in the majority. And so, I don't know what your scorecard looks like. My guess is my score's better now. The last Congress, it was okay. The first sort of third Congress that I was in there was probably different. With us in the majority, I can do that. I can't do it as well as when we have the White House as well. And then the last thing I would just say is, there are times in this race that people try to focus on different percentages, particularly from my first 8 months in Congress. I just want you to know the Republicans do that as well, and they come out with very different answers than my opponents do. So any of the Western Pennsylvania folks who helped me on my first reelection in November of 18 will know that all of the commercials that were run against me in that campaign said that I voted with Pelosi more than 90% of the time. And that's in the same time period in which some of my opponents in this race try to make it seem like I was 70% with Trump or something. Neither of those percentages are accurate. They're all completely cherry picked. And so, part of the reason I do all of these forums and never skip any is if anyone wants to ask me about a specific vote, I'm really very happy to answer it, but the percentages can be very misleading.
Thank you for answering that question this evening. Which kind of brings me to this next question that was asked of all the other candidates as well. And that is that Donald Trump has endorsed Dr. Oz as his candidate of choice to represent the Republicans in the U.S. Senate. So I want to ask you tonight, why do you believe it would be you to be best positioned to go up against someone such as Dr. Oz if he is to win and be on the general election ballot?
I think really because I'm the only one in this race that's ever beaten a Republican head to head before, and I've done it 3 times against 3 pretty different Republicans. Again, I think the thing that I bring you, like to go deeper on that and why it's relevant to you other than just sort of a statistical fact is I've just had to spend a lot of time around this different universe of voters that we have to get to win. Like the question of whether we need to appeal to swing voters or not, in my mind, that is not an open question. That is just an absolute yes. And all of the history in Pennsylvania supports that, particularly in a midterm year where the winds are sort of blowing against us. And, you know, if you're one of the folks that has aspirations that we're going to get higher turnout someday, I hope we do too. I just hope that anytime a politician promises you that, you look at the turnout numbers in their own districts, and almost always what you're going to see is they turn out fewer voters than you would ever expect. And so nobody has a magic formula to increase turnout. I think because I've had to spend a lot of time around these people, I understand their values and I know exactly who we're talking to. That's my concern with Fetterman and Malcolm. It's not that they're bad people or that their policies are awful or anything. I don't think they know who they're talking to. I don't think they know what it's like to try to appeal to this extra group of swing voters who are not really liberals. They're just not. I mean, we might wish that they were, but these are people that value stability, consistency, and even temperament, service to the country. I mean, those are the ways that I've appealed to people like that before. It's not by triangulating some position in between where they are and where you are. It's a set of character traits that they look at me and like. And so I think I'll be able to get them in this election as well.
Okay, we're almost at the end here. 2 more questions to go. You know, I want to switch modes a little bit. We've been talking about, you know, how you'd represent Pennsylvania. Let's talk a little bit globally. And obviously, we're still in the midst of a war in the Ukraine. And, you know, we still have that unbridled aggression from Russian leader Vladimir Putin. And we know, you know, there's many that would like to hold him accountable for war crimes, et cetera. And so, you know, I want to ask you, you know, how do you feel the United States has responded to this? How has NATO responded to this? And would you be in favor or in support of cooperation with the International Criminal Court to hold Vladimir Putin responsible for his actions?
I would. I mean, it's going to be difficult because we are not parties to the International Criminal Court, of course. That makes that challenging. But there's certainly a lot of ways in which we could support something like that. I think the reality is we have to beat him at war. I mean, that something like an ICC prosecution follows from a victory in war. And so, you know, I believe we should be a little more explicit that our goal here is for Ukraine to win this war and that we're going to do whatever it takes for them to win. I think we're already doing that effectively. That's our policy. Our communications are not always that clear and blunt, but I think to have the kind of endurance that we're going to need in this conflict, which may be years long, we need to show the world that we are willing to be the real leader here and say exactly what it's at stake and do everything that's necessary over a long period of time so that they can draw strength from us. I think Biden's doing a fantastic job of that right now. It's one thing to hold together this coalition for 2 months. It's going to be another to hold it together for 2 years. And so that's my main concern.
All right. Well, you know, you don't play around. If we say 2 minutes, you stick to the 2 minutes or less. So we appreciate that.
I do aspire for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm happy to say
we're
more if you want more.
Yeah.
I just know you want to cover a lot of ground. So
hey, well, this is our final question. So, you know, take your time on this one. And so that you can get, you know, say everything that you want to say out of this one. So this is the final question for you for this evening. And it's been asked of all the other candidates as well. And, you know, just really interested to hear from you, you know, we'll start with, you know, what's been the lesson that you've learned, you know, that you've served now in a few Congresses. What's the toughest lesson that you've learned in serving as a United States representative, representing Pennsylvania? And then if you want to close us out by telling us what's been your proudest moment spending the time so far as a United States representative. So let's start first with, you know, what's been the toughest thing? What's been the lesson learned? What's been the biggest challenge? And then close us out with what you're most proud of.
Sure. I think the toughest lesson for me, it may sound a little bit naive to some people on here, but there was part of me that went to Washington thinking that the gridlock that we had and the tribalism and the fighting was somewhat specifically tied to the legislators who were there, and especially on the Republican side who had been there for a really long time, and also tied to Trump himself. And that if we replace them, and particularly if we brought in a lot of younger people, a lot of civic-minded younger people, that we would get kind of this cultural change. And I still think we have to do that because we don't have really any better option. But I've come to believe in these 4 years that the roots of our polarization and conflict are a lot deeper than I ever understood before this. And January 6th is kind of the logical conclusion of that. Like even someone like me who had been through running against the Trump machine 3 times and really I was really a target of his. I mean, I felt like I understood him. I didn't see January 6th coming and playing out the way that it did. And the way, to me, what really confirms it is the institutional response of the Republican Party to banish people like Liz Cheney and run out all the people in the House that voted against Trump and, just basically engage in a large cover up of the event itself. It just kind of shows you how far gone they are from what we thought would be a reasonable sort of fact-based opposition party a generation ago. And that's discouraging for someone like me, because I as we just talked about earlier, I try to find ways to work with these people when I can. I know that's what my constituents want me to do. And so the more and more I've realized how deeply rooted this thing is, that's been a hard lesson. I will never, I'm a Marine. I will never admit defeat. Like we're going to beat these people no matter how long it takes, and we're going to change the system. But I think my own timeline for that has been adjusted. As far as pride, some of January 6th was a big moment for me. I have a hard time using pride as the emotion. In some ways, I have very mixed emotions about it, because the people that were on the other side of the chamber when I was speaking were people that I considered friends. I mean, if you happen to see my speech that night and saw some of the emotions that I was going through, for an Irish guy and a Marine, it's very rare to get emotional like that. So, it was a pretty unique situation. But at the end of the day, I felt like it was a moment in which I got to do really what is the highest calling of someone in that job, which is to take a tough stand on behalf of something you believe in and try to tell the truth. And so I walked away from that night feeling like, well, if I don't get to do anything else while I serve here, at least, in a moment like that, maybe I contributed something to the debate in an important moment. So I think I'll always be proud of that.
All right. Well, this is Congressman Connor Lamb, who is asking for your vote this evening. And so I want to thank you for being with us tonight in your hotel room there in Philadelphia. Stay safe. And thank you for being with us tonight and sharing some time and answering our questions. So thank you very much.
You guys too. Thank you for everything you do. Have a good one.
All right. All right, everyone. So this evening, we've heard from Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. We've heard from State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta and now Congressman Connor Lamb. And so tonight is all about you making your decision of who you're going to vote for when you cast your ballot on May 17th or earlier, if you're voting by mail, which you can do because it is still legal. And so hopefully you've learned something tonight. Maybe you heard something different than you've heard from previous debates. And so I want to thank Indivisible Pennsylvania for allowing me to be moderator this evening. I enjoyed this immensely. And I learned something every time that I watch these debates or forums, and I hope that you did as well. And so as executive director of the New Pennsylvania Project, I'm telling you, we are knocking on doors of people who want to have their needs met. And so I hope that you have heard what you needed to hear tonight to make sure that you are casting your ballot in the primary election for who you believe will help the people of Pennsylvania get their needs met. So I thank you for your time this evening. I'm going to pass it off to my friend, Vicki Miller, who will close us out.
Great. Thank you so much, Kadita. Wonderful job. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. You did a magnificent job as our moderator tonight. We really thank you. And we thank you all for coming this evening. We hope you learned a lot. We hope that you got your own questions answered with our questions. And one more reminder, well, 2 reminders. First of all, in the chat, you will see the link to the Indivisible Pennsylvania website that again has all that helpful information about the candidates. And then also a reminder, be sure to vote on May 17th or earlier if you already have your ballot. I just got my ballot in the mail today. So make sure you get out there and vote and tell 3 friends or 3 family members and make sure they get out and vote as well. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We'll see you all soon.